Well, welcome to the 700 Club. It's the 11th hour for Israel's prime minister. Opponents of Benjamin Netanyahu have succeeded in forming a historic coalition. But what's their common goal? It's one thing. It's bringing down Bibi Netanyahu. But it's not a done deal yet. So is there a Hail Mary move that could save the prime minister? Chris Mitchell is reporting from Jerusalem.
Members of the coalition called it a new beginning.
Today, we succeeded. We made history. We held our promise. As we always promised you, to tell the truth and to do what we said we will do. Tonight, we've succeeded.
The coalition of parties from right, center, left, and for the first time in Israel's history, an Arab Islamist party united around the main goal of bringing down Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Throughout the last campaign and also for the last 2 months, I reiterated and promised that the Labour Party would make every effort to form a government that would replace the Netanyahu regime.
Bennett, a religious conservative and a former ally of Netanyahu, and Lapid, a leader of the secular left, agreed to rotate the office of Prime Minister, with Bennett going first for 2 years and then Lapid for 2 years. Yet it's uncertain this fragile coalition will last that long, and if their common animosity towards Netanyahu will be enough to keep their government together. The 8 parties in the coalition represent ideologies from opposing ends of the political spectrum. Former U.S. ambassador to Israel told CBN News the question is if they can work together.
This is a very unusual government as it is laid out because while they are unified as a coalition, they've never been unified in terms of the political principles upon which they have built their parties. So what I'm waiting to find out really is, not what is the unity that brought them together, because we all know that's relatively shallow, but what are the unifying principles upon which they will govern?
The agreement still needs to be approved by a Knesset vote early next week. If sworn in, it will prevent the country from going to its 5th election in just more than 2 years and end the 12-year rule of Netanyahu, the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history.
Well, Chris Mitchell joins us now from Jerusalem for more on this. Chris, how fragile is this coalition against Netanyahu?
Well, Pat, it's very fragile. They only have one goal. The first minute, they want to get rid of Netanyahu. Perhaps they're right on the verge of that. What happens in the second minute? There's various ideologies represented in this coalition. Here's some of the political commentators have said over here, it's like a car with 4 wheels going in different directions. And with all due respect to Chinese food, it fills you up for an hour, and then what happens after then? So many feel there's going to be new elections in Israel before the 2022 midterm elections in the U.S. And, Pat, there's huge differences in the coalition right now. One example, Judea and Samaria. Some members of the coalition would want a 2-state solution. Other members would want sovereignty and annexation of Judea and Samaria. Gay rights is another big difference. Some of them are for them. Some, like the Arab Party, oppose them. Courts and justices, some want activists, some want conservative judges. And one more point, Pat, Bennett is very untested right now. He's only got 7 seats out of 120. He really doesn't have a mandate to lead, and many in his own party are upset with him for forming this government with Lapid. And we know the new government's going to be tested right away by Iran, Hamas, or by these internal differences.
Well, Chris, Bennett is referred to as a conservative. Does that mean he's an orthodox and goes along with all of that? And Lapid, when he is called secular, what does that mean in Israel?
Well, in secular, it means, Pat, that he really is opposed to many things like the religious would want to happen, and they want observance of Shabbat. There's secular people that don't want that. So there's a lot of internal differences represented by this coalition. And so, Pat, it's very important what's going to happen in the next 10 days. The vote will be perhaps ratifying this particular government. And it's really going to be continuation of these Game of Thrones episode. Really, there's been so machinations that have been going on in the politics. And the pressure will be in the next week or so before they vote about this new government that one or two could defect. They could make a huge difference. And that could mean either fifth elections or this government is going to be the next one for this place.
You know, weakness invites enemy problems. You know, when our biology is weak, it is then subject to disease. Do you think the Iranians or perhaps there's so many who might come after Israel, but I think particularly Turkey and that coalition there. Is there a thought that some attack might take place against Israel during this time of what we call interregnum?
I would think so, Pat. This is they're very weak politically, internally, and I would think either Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran is going to be putting pressure on this new government if it gets ratified next week, and that's the danger to Israel. They are unified politically about Iran for most part. They don't see that as one of the internal pressures, but weakness is being projected right now by Israel. It's surrounded by enemies as well as internal enemies, Pat. You know, there's been Arab riots here in the last couple of weeks, so that's one more added pressure on this particular government. But certainly, you don't want Israel, with all the external and internal pressures that are going on right now against the state of Israel, more important to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Let me add this one point, Pat. You know, there's also an internal pressure, political danger to Bibi Netanyahu within his own Likud party. There's members right now that would like to replace him. So as well as the external pressure with this coalition, he faces internal pressure from his own political party.
Boy, what a frightening scenario. Chris from Jerusalem, thank you so much, brother. Well, in other news, a $6 trillion price tag, a $2 trillion deficit next year, and trillions more in years to come. That's the staggering cost of President Biden's gargantuan budget. So what pushback can the president expect? CBN News White House correspondent Eric Phillips has more.
According to the president's budget proposal, that $1.8 trillion deficit will exist even with his proposed tax increases on businesses and the wealthy. Administration officials saying to see the benefit of this budget, one can't be short-sighted. You have to look long-term. The president's $6 trillion proposal is aimed squarely at the middle class, with generous tax credits for families, subsidies for children and seniors, plus free community college.
The best way to grow our economy is from the bottom up and the middle out.
Two-thirds of the proposal consumed by these main pillars, $2.3 trillion for Biden's American Jobs Plan, which focuses on the nation's crumbling physical infrastructure, job creation, and more, and the $1.8 trillion American Families Plan, which the administration deems as social infrastructure. The president wants to pay for it by raising taxes on businesses and the wealthy.
I don't have anything against anybody in Wall Street. I don't have anything against anybody making $1 million, but Wall Street did not build this country. The middle class built this country.
Even with those tax increases, the country would be $1.8 trillion in the red if the proposal passes as is. Administration officials insist a number of factors, including the tax increases, will work together over the long term to actually lower the deficit.
It's a terrible budget.
Economist Stephen Moore calls the proposal fiscally irresponsible.
One of the reasons this is such an unwise budget and so harmful to America's economic future is if that we were to pass a $6 trillion budget, we would see inflation continue to rage out of control and much higher than it is today.
CBN News financial editor Drew Park-Hill agrees.
It's not an accident that they released this budget proposal on a Friday before a holiday weekend.
He predicts the deficit could be even deeper than the administration anticipates.
As a general rule, the government does not bring this much in tax revenue as they estimate, and they end up spending more than what they think they will. So this could be a recipe for deficits much higher than what are being projected, which are already at a sustained record level.
There's also a social issue sticking point for conservatives. The budget fails to reenact the Hyde Amendment, a long-standing provision which prohibits federal money from being used for abortions.
For these 45 years, there's been agreement that maybe you support abortion, but you don't support the idea that someone should be forced to pay for it. That's been the common ground. That has been jettisoned by this administration and the proposed budget that this president has put forward.
One other aspect of the budget that's grabbing attention, military spending increases by less than 2%, something that's sure to get pushback. Of course, the budget process has a long way to go before it's approved. The White House is expecting to make concessions. At the White House, Eric Phillips, CBN News.
Insanity. They're going to punish wealth creators. They're going to put a hideous tax on us, and the major tax is going to be inflation. We're going to be paying more money for everything we spend. There'll be more money spent for gasoline, more money for energy, more money for plastics, more money for lumber, more money for everything. It's going to cost all of us. It's a hidden tax against the entire nation, and it is insanity. We're on the road to insanity, and only God is going to deliver us. But we need it because, as I've said many times, we didn't vote socialism in, but we're having a steady march towards socialism. And the arising of this so-called woke culture, which is permeating everything, including our military. And it just seems we showed in our last program how fragile the Democrat control of the House of Representatives is. And that is so important that H.R. 1 would federalize elections. And they want to have 2 more senators from the District of Columbia. They want to have another senator or 2 from Puerto Rico. They're talking about doing everything they can to stack the deck so they'll hold power forever. And there are only a couple standing in the way. So, again, please pray for Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, because they're the only 2 that can keep this thing from happening. And if they break the filibuster in the Senate, they're going to run this through as fast as they can. But in the fall elections, I think the American people are going to, there's going to be a cataclysmic shift in our electoral policies.